Thank you for joining the Lakeside Light Podcast. It's light to help you see your way, and a light version of our full televised Sunday services, which you can find on our website at lakesidechurch.org. This audio podcast is a weekly sermon message of intellectual, spiritual, and sometimes humorous nourishment for the road. Enjoy.
Oh God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. A few years ago, Claire Miller gave a children's moment that I still remember really well and does get referred to in our household occasionally. She taught the children and all of us about something called the Platinum Rule. Does any of you remember this? So, okay, all right. Okay. So you know the Golden Rule, of course. It is the rule we associate with one of the verses from today, right? Do unto others as you would have them do to you, is the Golden Rule. But for the Platinum Rule, Claire suggested that we take the Golden Rule another step, maybe a step further, or maybe just from a different angle. The Platinum Rule is, do unto others as they would have you do unto them. As they would have you do, right? I love this, because we have different needs, right? We want different things from one another. We should not assume that what I might want or need in a specific moment is exactly what you would want or need in a specific moment. So the real call might be to do unto others as they would have you do unto them. This, by the way, goes along well with a maxim from one of my favorite moral guides, John Hodgman. It is settled law in the court of Judge John Hodgman that you are to give in the way you've been asked to give, right? So like if a nonprofit asks for you to give toilet paper, don't give them wet wipes, right? Or if a person is asking you to help them in a specific way, like somebody says, I really need you to drop off dinner, don't then invite them to go with you to a restaurant, right? Listen to what they're wanting. Or like if a church is asking you to give to the general fund, don't give earmarked gifts, stuff like that. Right? You get the idea. But do unto others as they would have you do unto them. Now the Platinum Rule takes a little extra work and a little extra thought, right? It means you have to go ahead and assume you might not know what's best for everyone. So you have to be a little humble. It means you have to be open to different experiences and stories. You have to pay attention. You have to listen to live out the Platinum Rule. So Golden Rule, do unto others as you would have them do to you. Platinum Rule, do unto others as they would have you do unto them. Now listen. Gold and platinum, fabulous metals, really good stuff. But I've been doing some research. And so as a newly minted metal expert, having done 10 to maybe 12 minutes of research on Google, I have some news. There is a metal more valuable even than gold and platinum. That's right, I know. So I would like to introduce you to rhodium, right? Rhodium, I know, it's valued right now maybe at like roughly twice the value of gold and platinum. It's really rare, it's really strong. And yeah, it's usually used for catalytic converters, but I'm just saying that if you really want to flex for your metal know-it-alls, you should ask for rhodium jewelry for the upcoming maybe St. Patrick's Day gift exchange that we traditionally do. Rhodium, I don't know. So, now that you know about rhodium, I would like to introduce you to a new rule, the Rhodium Rule. That's right. Do unto others as God would do unto them. I know. The Rhodium Rule. So in today's reading, right, Jesus is continuing on his sermon, which we think of as the Sermon on the Plain, sermon on a level place, on a flat place. And last week, a petite sampling of us, just a few of us, spent some time with the first verses of Jesus' Sermon on the Plain, this section known as the blessings and the woes. So listen, if there are weeks where you might not want to have to listen to a sermon or spend some time with a passage, I can see how the woes passage wouldn't be the worst week to miss. Because unlike the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, right, in Luke, Jesus does not mince words. Jesus speaks very plainly, I know, on the Sermon on the Plain. You get it? You know? Okay, all right. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, I appreciate that. Right, in the Sermon on the Plain, he's on the same level with his listeners. So there's not a lot of drama. It's not a lot of vague ideas, right? In Matthew, it's blessed are those who are poor in spirit, but in Luke, Jesus is straightforward. He says, blessed are the poor. Blessed are the hungry. Blessed are those who weep. Blessed are you who are excluded and reviled. And then he continues. And the words we translate, we use the word woe here, but it does not mean cursed. It does not mean damned. It's more like a yikes or like a pay close attention or look out, right? So yikes to those who are rich. Woe to those who are rich. Yikes if you're full. Yikes if you're laughing now. Yikes if you are spoken well of in the public sphere. So the first part of the Sermon on the Plain, Jesus reverses the norms. He turns the usual order of the world on its head. Even the commonly accepted religious order is turned on its head, where wealth and respect would have been a sign of God's blessing, right? Jesus is instead describing not the ways of our world, but the ways of God's world. And so it is in that context that he continues the sermon with the passage we read today. Today's passage begins, I say to you who are listening, and this might be better translated, I say to you who are still listening, even after everything I just said, to those who are still listening and receptive to this world reversal. So, if we thought the woes passage was challenging, buckle up, right? Because now Jesus says to those of us who are still listening, here are some of the most difficult rules to live by. Love your enemy. Do good to those who hate you. Turn the other cheek. Give away your coat and also your shirt. Right? Are these things that you would have folks do unto you? Maybe. But truly, this is Rhodium Rule level stuff, right? This is how God acts. This is how Jesus acts. And here Jesus makes it clear the extreme way in which Jesus lives in the world, that's how he wants us to live too. In God through Christ, love is not just a feeling or an idea, right? Love has teeth. We see that clearly in Jesus' words here too, right? The Sermon on the Plain is packed with verbs. You don't just love your enemies as a feeling, you do, you bless, you pray, you give. And this action-packed approach applies to Jesus' most famous, well, not most famous, there's so many, famous phrase, turn the other cheek, right? This idea of turning the other cheek. Here, Jesus is not simply describing passive obedience. There's more going on. It's not just accepting violence. It is actively demonstrating and living into another way of being. A lot is made of this other cheek verse, and there is no one single valid interpretation of what is meant by the idea of turning the other cheek. But I do feel compelled to share with you one approach that is pretty widely accepted, but also that has popped up for me in every recent commentary on this passage. There are a lot of places that produce commentaries regularly, and this one keeps popping up. And it's the idea that there's meaning behind how one was struck on the cheek in Jesus' context. It was common practice for Roman guards to use a backhanded slap on those they encountered from a lower class. Beyond the infliction of pain that a backhanded slap would issue, it was also a great insult. The palm of your hand is kept clean. The palm is what you use for good things, clean things, pure things, eating. The back of your hand is an insult. You would never touch dirty things with your palm. So you would slap the peons with the back of your hand. Pastor Roger Gens writes, I've learned from community organizing that if someone is using power against you, they either expect you to be passive or fearful. So do neither. Love in this situation entails finding a way to work for the common good. Turning the other cheek is indeed forcing the common good. In the ancient world, if a person in power struck an inferior on the cheek, they most likely used a backhanded slap aimed not just to injure, but to dishonor and humiliate. Thus, Jesus advises turning the cheek, forcing those in power to hit you with an open hand like an equal, recognizing your dignity. Neither passive nor fearful. Turning the cheek is not just nonviolent, right? It is not simply walking away from a slapper. Turning the other cheek is a definitive rejection of the power of violence to rule our world. It is a lived theology of the cross writ large. By the Rhodium Rule, how would God accept being slapped on the cheek? Well, we know what that looks like, right? God would walk that slap all the way to the cross. Not passively dying, but subverting the power of violence completely and showing us that in God's reign, power does not look like slaps or money or oppression. And of course, for the record, Jesus dies for the enemies in his world too, right? The image of a level plane is not for nothing, right? All of this, who's above whom, who has power over whom stuff, it's leveled by the cross. You will be children of the Most High, for he himself is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. So, the Rhodium Rule. It's a hard rule. It's maybe impossible. There is something crucial about this passage that I, at least, often overlook. Jesus is not speaking to an individual, right? Jesus preaches to the crowd. Jesus speaks to us not as individuals. Jesus speaks to us as a community. Mary Hinkle Shore points this out. This ethic is not meant to be tried alone. The Rhodium Rule is not meant to be tried a rule. The text is not a directive, for instance, to an individual suffering spousal abuse to bear up under it while the rest of her Christian congregation looks the other way. In the reign of God, we live and act in community. We are not meant to go this alone. And I don't know about you, but right now I need to hear that. Last week, I mentioned that one of the hardest things about these past couple of months has been this feeling that, for me at least, there's no shared narrative. This feeling that we can all be living in the same timeline, in the same moment, in the same location, but each be experiencing it wholly differently, one from another. It is so easy to feel isolated. Like the whole world is slapping you backhanded and no one's noticing. Or maybe worse, they're noticing, but they're telling you actually that's not a backhanded slap at all. It's a help, or it's deserved, and it's better for everyone, maybe. But as isolating as this moment might feel, remember that you are not alone. The Rhodium Rule is about creating a whole new shared reality on earth like it is in heaven. So what does it look like to love as a community? And not just love each other, right? I mean, that's hard enough, of course, but as Jesus points out, if you love those who love you, what credit is that? Even the sinners do that. He's not impressed. So what does it look like for a community to love others? How do we together love? And how do we make it have teeth, right? Do good, pray, bless, give. From the top of the Sermon on the Plain, how do we love and serve the poor, the blesseds, right? The hungry, the weeping, the rejected. And then from today's section, how do we together as a community love even enemies? What does that look like? How do we love and how do we support one another in loving? Who is feeling like the only one noticing the poor or the hungry right now? And how can we show up to let them know they're not alone? Maybe at dinner for Covington next Saturday, right? Who in our community, who in our lives is turning the other cheek right now, and how can we help them? Who in our community needs backup? We need each other. Because no joke, the Rhodium Rule is an impossible rule to live by. And I think that's why Jesus eases us into it with the golden rule, maybe, right? It's an impossible rule to live by, but it is what God, what Jesus challenges us to do and be. And as they say, we can do hard things. And together, we can do even harder things. And more important, God has already done the hardest thing. There's grace upon grace upon grace. So know that even in hard times and hard places, together, we can be a part of that grace too. Thanks be to God.
The Lakeside Light Podcast is a copyrighted production of Lakeside Presbyterian Church. Visit our website at lakesidechurch.org for more information. Have a great week.